Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Nicole. Sorry for the little snag. This is one of my first webinars I've done as a host, so I apologize for the delay. I'm Nicole. I am founder of Homework for Kids and mother of two. Homework for Kids is the newest online community dedicated to helping connect parents with educators and tutors for their K through 12 kids. We donate a portion of our profits to kids' educational charities because we believe every child deserves access to a quality education. I am thrilled to introduce Carol Smith, our first speaker this evening, our very first, webinar speaker this evening. And I just want to give you a little bit of information about her. Carol has been working on education since 2002. And in exceptional education since 2004. She has worked in the classroom and participated in action research at all levels of education, including college, high school, middle school, elementary school, and preschool. Her current position is as an elementary instructional specialist with the Office of Exceptional Education in Richmond Public Schools. That's a mouthful, Carol. And when she is not working, she enjoys reading mystery novels. That's awesome. And is where the bad guy or girl gets caught. I like that. And being walked by her dogs. I like that too. What type of dogs do you have?
I have three. They are small ones, but they are in charge. I have two Chinese cresteds and a Chihuahua. So,
oh wow.
Yeah, they're
mighty.
House, but yeah.
Small but mighty.
That's
well,
right.
I'm going to hand it over to you, Carol. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We are recording this. So if you have to leave, or if you won't know if you join late, but if you leave early, we will send this out afterwards so that you can all see it. Carol, over to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I am so passionate about education. You know, as you can tell from my bio, I've been doing it a long time. And, you know, I love to talk about different ways that we can help kids be successful. And I'm just so happy to have been invited to come and talk with you tonight. So thank you for having me. Some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight is, I'm just going to move this up out of the way. Thank you. We're going to be talking about pandemic-related loss and what expected gaps in learning may be. And then we're also going to talk about what are some of the supports that schools already have in place for struggling learners. And then I'm going to do an overview of what special education is and the process and the steps for the evaluation and the difference between special ed and a 504. And then there is going to be some time for Q&A at the end. But if in the middle of it, if you have a question or if something I'm saying isn't clear and you need some clarity, please go ahead and raise your hand or put it in the chat. Deborah and Nicole are going to be monitoring the chat so they can let me know. You know, this is something, like I said, I'm real passionate about it. I've been in it a long time. And so like, I know what I'm talking about in my head, but if it's not clear to you, then please let me know so I can make sure that it is clear and that you can understand it. Also, you may hear me say exceptional ed and special ed, and I use those terms interchangeably. Different districts call it different things. When I'm talking about it, I am talking about the struggling learners, but I do sometimes say special ed and sometimes say exceptional ed. I've worked in districts that have said it different ways. And so in my mind, I just sort of say whatever comes first out of my mouth, okay? So here we go. We're going to go ahead and get started. So there we go. So when we're talking about pandemic related loss, like how COVID has impacted instruction or academic learning. And I know we hear about it a lot in the news. It's always in the news, like this is how COVID is impacting things. But the reality is we don't really know yet what the full impact is. We do know that there has been some research on the health impact, so social, emotional, and physical health. And there's been some peer-reviewed research-based articles that provide some quantitative data on the health impacts. But when we're talking about academic impact in grades K through 12 in the USA, We don't really have that data yet. And trust me, I searched for it because I didn't want to come on here and say something that wasn't true, right? And so I did lots of, digging into databases and searches for the quantitative research-based studies on the educational academic impact. And I talked with a lot of people. And what I kept hearing is it's ongoing and we don't know. And part of that is because when school buildings first closed in 2019, the standards of learning exams, or the SOLs, were canceled in Virginia for that year. So we don't have that end of year data. And without the end of year data, we don't really have that to compare to the beginning of year for the next year, which was last school year. And there were so many virtual options throughout the state there, and so many parents opted out of the SOL assessments last year that we don't really have a full picture of last year's end of grades or end of course exams and scores either, to be able to compare, which we can't compare to the previous year because we didn't have them. So then all of that rolls over to, we don't have it to compare to the beginning of this year. So really this school year is the first school year that we've had in 2 years where we're going to have the full data to be able to look where students start the year and where they end the year. Now, what we do know is we do know that the expected outcomes have not changed. So for example, a 4th grader is expected to know the knowledge that they're expected to have and mastered by the end of 4th grade is the same as it was before COVID. So that hasn't changed. There's been no grace given to what the expected outcomes are. And that's, I'm not complaining about that. I'm just saying that that's something that we do know, that we know that the expectations are the same. And so all of that to say, what can you do this year? We don't really have the full picture this year, but what can we do so far? The number one thing you can do to find out where your child is to reach out to your child's current teacher, because they are the experts in that content area or that grade for what the end of grade or end of course expectations are. They know what those are. They also know what the benchmarks are. The benchmarks are, what is that? I'm going to use 4th grade again. What is a 4th grader expected to know at the beginning of the year, at the middle of the year, and at the end of the year? They are the experts in that. And they can tell you if your child is meeting those benchmark expectations or on track to be able to have mastered and make sufficient progress by the end of the year to meet those end of the year expectations and goals. So that's the number one thing you can do. But then there's also lots of things that you can do at home too, that it's not school related. I mean, it's not doing homework, I guess is what I'm saying. There's lots of things you can do. We cannot state enough how important it is to read every day. For young kids who aren't readers yet, you can read to them. For kids who are readers, even if they're beginning readers, they can do some of their own reading. You can read together, they can read to you, they can read on their own. But reading every day, there's lots of research that has indicated and shows over and over again that reading every day really improves outcomes for kids. And one of the reasons about that is because reading is in everything, in every content, right? And so even if it's math, you need to be able to read the directions, you need to be able to read word problems, right? And so reading is involved in everything. Also, having conversations, just talking with your kids is a really big, has a big impact as well. And again, there's lots of research that shows how important conversations and the size of vocabulary, right? So the more vocabulary you know, the better reader you're going to be. And then that goes back to what we were just talking about, the better reader you are, the better that outcomes you have in school. So just conversations about what was going on today in school, or maybe you don't want to make it school related. Maybe it's about about their friends, or, March Madness is among us, right? So you may want to talk about like sports and different things. And when you're talking about that, you can say, well, sports involves counting, right? And knowing which is the biggest number or smallest number to know who wins. And, talking about statistics, right? For the older kids. So things like that you can talk about. You can also have conversations about, what is it that you're interested in doing? Instead of saying, what do you want to be when you grow up? You can say, what are some like jobs that interest you? And if they say professional athlete, you can be like, that's great. I hope you make it. You need to be able to read your contract and you need to be able to count your money, right? Or you can say, if they say veterinarian, and it's like, oh, that's a, great job. I love animals too. You need to be able to read up on all these different kinds of animals because vets work with lots of different animals, and you need to be able to know if they come in not feeling well, how to make them feel better, right? So you can have those kinds of conversations, and you can talk about your ideas and values about school. the why behind what it is that you're learning. So there's reading, and reading can be anything. It can be a comic book, a magazine, whatever. And then also just having these conversations. Those are some really impactful things that you can do just sort of naturally at home that can help students in school as well. So those are some of the things you can do. So now we're going to talk about what are some of the supports that schools are already offering. And it's going to look different school to school, exactly what it is, but these are the things that are listed here are some things that would be offered in any school for any student, okay? So you don't have to be a student with a disability or a student in special ed to receive these supports. These are for any child that's in that school. And if you need them, you can use them. And if you don't, you don't, but they're there for you. So intervention is something where we have noticed and looking at the data that a student may be struggling in a particular area. It could be language arts, it could be math, it could be in behavior. So maybe, they're struggling with focusing, we could notice that and we can provide some interventions. An intervention can look very different. It can be instruction, so some individual or different kind of deeper instruction in that language arts or math, or in self-regulation. It can be an accommodation, so it could be visuals or manipulatives, which we're about to talk about in a second. It can also be an accommodation of like taking some breaks or having someone to talk to, or just sitting in a different place. So, or having something special in their desk. Velcro on the underside of desks is a really great accommodation to help students who are struggling with attention or getting out of their seat. It's just sort of it's a very quiet, almost kind of a fidget kind of thing to have that on the underside. So there's lots of different kinds of interventions that can look like. Then there's also direct instruction. And so direct instruction is, first of all, what direct instruction is it is presenting information in a specific sequence that builds upon skills. So it builds foundational skills upon each other to be able to do more complex things. And every school does this. And for reading and in math already. That's what their curriculum is. It's presenting information in a specific way to build those skills. But sometimes kids need a little bit more than that. And so you may do a little bit deeper instruction and for direct instruction. It may be a different type of direct instruction to see if that program works a little bit better, or it could be just sort of tweaking it and looking at it a different way. So, for example, in reading, a lot of reading, the direct instruction that we have is introducing specific sounds and letters in a specific order so that when you put them together, they form words. And maybe a student's really still struggling on that. So in addition to having that, they're also going to have another form of direct instruction, which really focuses on the rules of reading. And the rules of reading are, if there's a vowel and a consonant in front of it and behind it, it's most likely going to be a short vowel sound. But if it is a consonant and then a vowel behind it, if it's a vowel, consonant, vowel, then it's going to be a long vowel sound. So they then are taught to sort of notice these patterns, and through those patterns, incorporate those into their reading. It's still direct instruction. It's just sort of a different method to build upon the sound one, that to be able to put those together. So that can be another support that the schools may provide. Again, this is for anybody, and intervention and direct instruction can be done in the classroom or outside of the classroom. Small groups also can be done in the classroom, outside of the classroom. And small groups are really helpful, and most classrooms already do this as well. You may have, if you've been in the schools, you've seen it. They're in different stations doing different things, and the teacher rotates through them, or there's a couple of teachers rotating through it. And it's a really great way to be able to, for the teacher to be able to focus more on a smaller group of students, so it can give some more individualized attention. The students also receiving more attention from the teacher, and you can do different things in different groups that are key towards the needs of that particular group of students. Again, that's available to anybody. We already provide these to everybody. Visuals and manipulatives, that could be some of the pictures on the side here. So math, it is working with counters for younger kids. It can be working with models for the older kids, like 3D models for the older kids in math. It could be for graphic organizers. There's some there for writing and for reading, to be able to organize your thinking, to be able to answer questions. You can use a graphic organizer. And then also showing your thinking. That could be a different way to explain your work. Just like people learn in different ways, they may express their thinking, express their work in different ways. And so kids have lots of different ways that they can show their work and talk about it. One of the best things that we're finding right now in math is to be able to have a conversation about how you solved it. So talk about how you solved it. That helps a lot of kids. Some kids do straight algorithm. I'm one of those. I was one of those kids. I'm a linear thinker. I could do the algorithm. The having to draw it all out and everything, that was a little too, I didn't understand why I had to do that too, basically. But some kids really, the drawing really helps them. And then for other kids, it's really just talking it out and talking about how they solved the problem. And because it may look like it's all mixed up on the page, but they know exactly what they did and they can explain it to us. And so that's helpful, because then we know if they understand the content and if they got the right answer because they know how to get there. And B, if they didn't, we can find out where the breakdown is in their process of that, of figuring out that information. So again, these are supports that every kid has access to that are in the school. Any questions so far? I've given a lot of information and I hope I'm not talking too quickly. Any questions so far?
You are doing just fine. I don't see any in the chat at the moment.
Okay, I'm going to keep on going, but stop me if it changes, okay?
Will do.
Okay, so we get to this slide. Now we're getting into, we've talked with the teacher, you've tried some, interventions or some of the supports that every kid has, and your child is still struggling. And so now you're starting to think, well, maybe there is a suspected disability and we need to sort of look into that a little bit. So special ed or exceptional education can be, and it is actually very complex. Okay. So I have broken it down into a couple of different process charts, all right? Because there's overall steps, and then within each of these circles, there's a process for each of these circles. So we're going to talk about them and sort of go over them to try and demystify it and make it a little less complicated. So the main steps, when you start to think that maybe I wonder if my child needs some more support, the first thing you do is you go to Child Find. And in our state, it is a law that we need to be looking to see if there are kids that may need some more support. And that is called Child Find. That's just the term that we use. So there's Child Find. And then from there, you go to the school-based intervention team, which you may have heard called SBIT, which is just an acronym. Like every profession, we love our acronyms and our abbreviations. So from Child Find to SBIT, to response to intervention, which is called, we say RTI, which is basically implementing some interventions and seeing how effective they are, and then maybe evaluation once you get to that point. So this is the overarching sort of steps: Child Find, SBIT, RTI, evaluation. And now we're going to look at each one individually. But before I do that, I do want to just put in a plug right here that it is really important all the time, but particularly if we get to this point, that we have your input in it. Once we get to Child Find, and I'm going to start talking about the Child Find team and the SBIT team and RTI, all of that team involves the family. And we really need your input in it because we want to get a full picture of this child to figure out the best way that we can support them and find success for them, find a way for them to be successful, right? And the way to do that is to get your input and our input together, because the better picture we have of the child, the better the intervention we can design, the more successful the child can be. So I just wanted to put that plug in there real quick to, I know it can be complicated and intimidating, but please feel free to reach out to us and, be a part of it and ask questions. And so I'm glad that you're here, because that means that you're interested in it and you're not afraid to to be part of that process. But I just had to put that little plug in there. So child find. So this is how child find works. Remember, this is the one I said that, we have to be on the lookout for students who may require some additional supports, and that is called child find, or CFT for child find team. So the first thing that happens is a referral is made for the child to child find. And that can be made by anybody. That can be made by the family. That can be made by a teacher. It can be made by an administrator. Anybody can say, you know what, I think this child is really struggling. We need to look a little closer at what is, what the problem is and what are some intervention solutions that we can come up with. And that initial concern is called the referral. And once that referral is made, then the administration, so the principals or assistant principals, they'll get the records and then they'll contact you. So if the parents didn't make the referral, if someone else did, then they're going to contact the parents and say, hey, we've had this referral, we need to have a meeting. And we have 10 days between the moment, the day that the referral is made to the day we have a child find team meeting. Okay, so we don't want that to go very long, right? So there's 10 days between the date it's made and when we have to have the meeting. It could be before then, but no more than 10 days. So you have the meeting, the child find meeting. And while you're in the meeting, the team, which includes the family and the school, you're going to look at what are some of the concerns, and what are some possible solutions? What are some things that have been done? What hasn't been done? And from that, you're going to decide you can either go straight to special ed evaluation, or you can go be referred to the SBIT. Most of the time, the child is referred to SBIT because just because a referral is made doesn't necessarily mean that we have enough information to go straight to evaluation. By law, we just can't go straight to evaluation without the data to support it. What are the instances you may go straight to evaluation? It could be maybe you had a private evaluation done either by a pediatrician who has diagnosed your child with, autism or something else, or maybe you had a private psychological evaluation done in terms of like a reading test or something like that done. We will certainly use that as information, but we're still going to need some of our own information, and that could either come straight from the evaluation or maybe we're going to send it to SBIT. It really depends on what the team decides. Once you go to SBIT, that doesn't mean you're never going to be evaluated. That's why that little swoopy line is on the bottom right there, because you may end up going from SBIT into special ed evaluation. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But I just wanted you to know from that initial child find meeting, there's really two ways you can go. You can go directly to special ed if we have enough data to support it already, or we may decide we need more data before we can decide if we're going to go to special ed evaluation or not. You can also decide to do nothing. You can do that at any time. So if you go to SBIT, you also do this is where RTI comes into play, the response to intervention. So you go to SBIT and you say, you know what, we have identified where the challenge is, and we've identified some possible solutions and interventions that we're going to put in place, okay? So that's part of the reviewing the current data. You've chosen now your intervention, when it's going to happen, who's going to do it, and how you're going to collect the evidence. Once you've done that, that's the determine the intervention, then you're going to implement it. All the things you just said, who, how, when, what, now you're going to do it. All right. And then while you're doing that, you're going to be collecting data, determining what, depending on what the outcome you're looking for. Maybe you're looking at increased fluency, which is how quickly someone reads, right? So you're going to be collecting data on their baseline. So how fast were they reading at the beginning? And then you're going to collect data regularly to find out how they're reading once this intervention has been implemented. And then you're going to review the current data again. So it goes around in the circle. When you get to review the data again, you may at that point decide to evaluate. You may say, you know what, it's working some, but not quite as well as we'd like, but we think if we tweaked it this way, it may be better. So you tweak it and you start the cycle again. Or you can say, you know what, it's working, and we're just going to stick right here. And then you leave the RTI cycle because you've already found what's working. You can always come back to it and always review the data again. Once you leave the cycle, it doesn't mean you can't come back in. It's just that that's part of what we need to do. We need to review the current data, decide what we're going to do it, look at the data to see what's happening once we've implemented it, and then review it again to see what our next steps are going to be. Okay. All right. So let's say you've done all of those things and either progress is not being made or it's not being made at a rate that is sufficient, that, you know, they're making a little bit of progress, but it's not enough to get caught up. So at this point, the team may decide, you know what, we suspect there may be a disability here and we're ready to evaluate. And so that's what that first block is. The SBIT team decides it's time to evaluate. In Virginia, we are a consent state. And what that means is we cannot do anything with special ed without the parents' signed consent, okay? So we need it in writing that you consent to it. So the SBIT team may decide to evaluate and you may be part of that team, but we can't do it until you sign on the dotted line, right? That it's okay to evaluate. Then once we do that, again, the team together is going to decide what are the components that you're going to evaluate. If it's an initial, typically, and it is a team decision, so it doesn't necessarily always have to be this, but typically when you have an initial evaluation, you're going to be looking at a psychological, which is really looking at IQ, a full scale IQ, to be able to compare it to an educational evaluation, which is looking at achievement, and both of those to compare to anything else that you're doing, because you're looking at all of these as a whole and how they not compare to each other, maybe that's not the right word, but how the pieces fit together, right? And so it can tell you a lot of things about if they score, you know, high on one and low on another, that can tell you a lot of information. And so there's lots of different things that you can choose, but those are the two main ones. There's usually also a social cultural. And for that one, we're really sort of asking questions about, you know, we're not trying to get too deep into your family dynamic. It really is more about, you know, how was the birth? Was it a typical, you know, pregnancy and birth? Is there anything that could, you know, be a factor and it wouldn't knock them out of special ed contention, but is there anything that we can know that isn't necessarily going to be found on these assessments or in school that may also be a factor that is important for us to know so we can help the student? And then once we decide to evaluate, really, the day that we decide to evaluate, we have 65 days to choose the components and complete those components before we have the eligibility meeting. So again, we have a timeline in place because we don't want it to go on for too long. We want to, you know, it may feel like it's taking forever, but really we're trying to make it go as quickly as possible so we can get the right kind of information so we can do the right thing for the kid, okay? All right, so you've done all of that, and now you're at the eligibility meeting, and you can decide, yes, the student qualifies for special ed. In Virginia, there are 13 categories that a student can qualify under for to receive special ed. And if you say yes, then the moment that you say yes, they do qualify. And again, the family, the parents need to sign that, yes, they agree that they do qualify. From that day, we have 30 days to design the IEP and have that meeting for the IEP meeting. An IEP is an individualized education plan. Every student who receives exceptional ed or special education has an IEP. It is what determines, it talks about all the present levels, and the present levels are the current assessment scores that we just had, their grades, their academic and functional performances like social skills or how they're able to maneuver within their day. That's non-academic things. And it also includes the goals. It includes it talks about what their deficits and strengths are, which is what allows you to write their goals and their accommodations, how they're going to be tested, what their services are, how often they have them. It includes everything. Okay, so it's a very dense legal document that includes everything. So that's why you have 30 days to be able to write it, because it's pretty intense. Okay, we want to make sure we do it right. So if they're found eligible, you have 30 days to design the IEP. That again is a team, done as a team. Okay, so that includes you. If they are not found eligible, or let me go back to this. Let me clarify it. So eligibility does not mean if they are said they're not found eligible, that doesn't mean that they may not have a disability. There are lots of kids in public school that do have a documented eligibility, but they don't need special ed. And that is because we need to say that that disability has an impact on their academics in a negative way to receive special ed. So let me give an example. Let's say a student has ADHD and or ADD, attention deficit disorder. And in Virginia, that would fall under the category of other health impaired, or OHI. So let's say we say, you know what, they do have ADD. We have a doctor's evaluation that says it. And our test that we have, we've said that it looks like on our checklist and on the psychological definitely falls within the zones that indicate that there is ADD. However, it's not impacting their education. So, it may, and we see this a lot when we have a medical diagnosis, because a medical diagnosis is different from an educational one. And so we have to be able to say that it's impacting their education. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second when we talk about 504s. I just want to say that right now, that we have to be able to say that they need specially designed instruction in order to access the curriculum, okay, in order to benefit, to be able to access the general curriculum. So if we say no, that they either don't have a disability or is not impeding their education, then we can either go back to SBIT, you can leave the process altogether, or you can go to 504, which we're about to talk about now. So to continue what I was just saying, so for an IEP, there's those 13 categories that a student can be found eligible under. It has to include all the parts of the IEP, and it must mean that the student requires specially designed instruction to access the general education curriculum. So that means that even with the interventions that we did with SBIT, even with accommodations, they still require more. They require specially designed instruction to be able to access the curriculum in public school. For a 504, it may be that they only require accommodations, right? So this is what I was talking about before. Maybe I jumped a little bit ahead when I was talking about the ADD. So let's go back to that example. And so a student has attention deficit disorder. They have a really difficult time focusing. But if they are provided the accommodation of a special place to sit, headphones while they're working so they're not distracted by noise, and a small group during testing, those are all accommodations. They can do grade level work, no problem, if they are given those accommodations. In that case, you may consider doing a 504, because that's what a 504 is. A 504 is you need accommodations only. You don't need the specialized instruction. And so, like I said, there are lots of students, and it could be, and another example could be maybe a student that is vision impaired. And so maybe they just need some accommodations like Braille or bigger, larger print or something, maybe some sort of assistive technology device. And that's all they really need, right? So there's lots of ways that a 504 may be more appropriate. It's also, the definition is to be found eligible is much broader. So in order to be found eligible for a 504, there needs to be a suspected disability that impedes a major life activity. Okay, and so a major life activity could be something like eating, walking, toileting, but it can also, and it says this in the list, reading, learning, writing, right? So if you just need an accommodation to help you be able to write, like maybe it's some sort of OT, occupational therapy, some sort of device, assistive technology, or like I said, those headphones or something, some kind of accommodation. That's all you need is that accommodation. Then you can get a 504. That's the main difference. Do you need specialized instruction or do you need an accommodation? Okay. So I know I just put a lot more information on you again. So that's what I have. So I wanted to open it up to questions. And thank you so much. I just want to say that up front. I really, like I said, love to talk about it. So if you have any questions, let me know. Anything I can clarify?
Thank you so much. I don't see any in the chat, but I think in your final slide, you really hit on the difference between the IEP and the 504. What is a parent to do if in the evaluation process, they think something needs to be happening, but there's disagreement within the team.
Yeah, that's tough, right? When people don't agree, right? So the first thing I'm going to say is we need to be able to have the data that supports any decision we make. So whether that means to do something or not to do something, we have to have the data that shows it. And for schools, that means we have to have the data that shows that it's affecting them academically, right? And so oftentimes, or I shouldn't say oftentimes, but sometimes what happens is, parents will say, well, but, that we feel like they're, not making enough progress. And the schools will say, well, they are making progress, and so then you have to sort of just keep that communication and talk about, well, what's sufficient progress? So ask the school, what is it that makes sufficient progress? How do you know that's sufficient progress? And they can talk to you about, the rate of change and how that could get them caught up to where they need to be. You can talk about it that way. You could also say, if you're saying, I don't think my child does need that, talk to me why you think they do need this additional support, and so it really is talking more about the why behind it to sort of get there. And ultimately there is, if you just can't come to resolution, the two, the team, I don't want to say the two sides because I hate to talk about it that way, but the team cannot decide, then you can't come to a consensus, then there are some other options. There's mediation, that is an option, and that is offered through VDOE, and you can go to their website and have them come and help facilitate a meeting and do some mediation. And then there's also due process that you can do as well. And all of that information is also on VDOE. So there's also the parental rights handbook, which you can get from your school and also from VDOE as well. So there are some options you can have, but the first one I think that everybody would like to try is really just sort of talking with each other to find out, what's the why behind both sides, and is there a way that we can sort of, I don't want to say meet in the middle because that's not right either, but sort of, figure out what is it that the student really needs and how can doing or not doing something help them.
So a question that has appeared in the chat, have you seen an increase in referrals this academic year due to the pandemic, or has it been the opposite, that you're getting less because of virtual?
So I can only speak for my district. And so, I don't know how it's going nationwide, but I can say that we have seen an increase in referrals. That doesn't mean we've seen an increase in evaluations, though. They're two different things. But we have seen an increase in referrals, yes.
I think one of the things that a lot of parents are questioning in considering, like, is my child delayed, or is this just what the pandemic has done? I know you looked for data, but do we have a sense of like how far people are behind in learning to read or mastering certain milestones versus a normal year?
I really don't. And I really did, because I know that was going to be a question, and I know that was sort of what it was about. So I really did try and see, and we just don't know yet. We're trying to find out, but we just don't know yet. And so what I can tell you is that, again, I'm looking at the data only in my district, but we are seeing a lot of growth from the beginning of this year to where we are so far. Is that going to then meet up with where we need to be at the end of the year? We won't know till we get to the end of the year, so.
Right, we're not quite there, and that's the related question, kind of that we did do benchmarking at the beginning of the year, and we are seeing growth and gaps, lessening within certain schools. We won't know till the end if that's across the board or how specific that is and whatnot, but is there a general belief that kids are capable of making up this information?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and I think that, oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. I can't say that enough. Yes. And I think sometimes, and we've had this conversation, especially when we look at how much growth has been made from the beginning of the year to this year, just in awe of how resilient kids are. And and how much, even when we believe they can do it, they can always do more, right? You know, and so really having that perspective and that growth mindset that it can happen, as opposed to, oh my gosh, what is happening? You know, so trying to, you know, change that sort of mindset to think about, to remember, I shouldn't say think about, but to remember that these are our kids and they are learning and they can make it up. Absolutely. Yeah.
Are there others on the call that have questions? I know not everybody is at a point where they can write. If you want to raise a hand or something, I can.
I'm going to stop sharing so I can see the whole screen.
Yeah.
I can do that. That would be great if I can get, here we go. There we go. And feel free to talk out if you want to. You don't have to raise your hand. You can just.
Yeah. And I'm curious, of the people here, where are you located?
Oh, yeah.
Because I know that Carol is in the Richmond and Henrico area of Virginia, but y'all could be anywhere.
Is this nationwide or is this in Virginia only?
It is nationwide. It is well, we are growing.
All right.
So Kate was in New Jersey. We got Atlanta, Georgia.
All right.
Great. All right. Well, Nicole, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. And I'm going to attempt to share my screen without breaking the whole system. But hold on 1 second. I just want to say thank you so much to Carol. That was awesome. And let's see if I can make this work. And this is just my little, the slides I couldn't get to before. Can you see that, Debbie, Carol? You guys see my little screen?
Yes,
okay,
yes.
So anyway, thank you so much, Carol. I appreciate you being our first ever. We are a new company. We are excited. Speakers like you, some of my friends are listening and they're like, wow, you have a great speaker. I was like, well, that's what makes it easy. So if you want to speak every month, no. But I would actually love your perspective in 6 months to a year from now to see where you think we have gotten. How are the kids doing? I spent the day myself today. I have a very unique situation, but my kid is not in her school because her school burned down. But now they're in a temporary virtual mishmash of I don't know what, but you can still see them wanting to learn, even though they're wearing a mask. They don't have a desk. They don't have any of their stuff. They're still sitting there like little sponges, just like excited to be a part of it all and know what's next.
It is fun to be in the schools and seeing them like they are excited to learn. It's really great.
It really is. And so, and hopefully what we are doing, we are trying to make it so that it's easy for parents and tutors to connect without, I don't know, putting a burden on parents to have to reach out via Facebook groups, via who do you know that can tutor my kid in this subject? We created a little database that you can just search for what you need. And we hope to do a lot more of these webinars. Our next one is going to be about saving for college and 529 plans, which I would love to learn more about myself. That is going to be on April 13th at 7:30, same time, different day. We're going to try and do one once a month. Feel free to follow us on Facebook or Instagram, Homework for Kids LLC, or go to our website and you can sign up for those. And this presentation, Carol's presentation, will be available on our website and soon, as soon as I figure out how to do that. And thank you again so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And I didn't know it was your first speaker. That's exciting for me. So thank you.
You're my very first
speaker. She just launched the company. It's awesome.
Set the bar high. So we'll see how we do next.
I would love to come back in like 6 months to a year and sort of like talk, part 2 and see,
that would be great.
Going. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for all the great information, Carol. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.